Why do we call it one moment? Because in any given day, 24-hour day, we have 86,400 seconds. And so in our philosophy, we have 86,400 moments to make a decision. Every decision that might or might not be is neither here nor there. And so, I would like for you to open the floor up today and kind of see where it's going to go. I know we spoke yesterday. I know we talked about the agenda yesterday. A lot of good stuff we were, preparing for, and we were covering and talking about. So I would definitely love to have you start us off and bring your expertise.
I can do that, I think. So, interestingly enough, I think all of us, this particular topic we're gonna talk about today, all of us experience, and that is boundaries. Sometimes I think boundaries are a difficult thing for a lot of people, whether they have difficulty asserting their boundaries, some people push boundaries, that type of thing. And I think we all go through it in some capacity, even for ourselves. We're not talking about other people sometimes, we're not talking about physical boundaries, but even boundaries for ourselves. I recall you just did a pod maybe a few weeks ago, Kevin, about social media, right? And how social media is just how it impacts us all. And I think with the uprising of social media and just the way we have complete access to one another 24 hours, 7 days a week, it even makes it harder when we're in this work hybrid kind of office hybrid kind of environment. Everything's accessible 20 a day. So boundaries are just very important. I wanted to talk.
No, I think you're definitely right. Boundaries is very important. I mean, when we look at everything that we have going on in a fast evolving world, right? Like, yes, I am of the theory that, when we look at the theory of evolution, Charles Darwin was right when he theorized about the theory of survival. It's an ever evolving world, it's ever adapting. And so we have to continue to change and adapt. But yet, I think there's also, as you said, there's boundaries, whether it be social media, whether it be employment, whether it be family, whether it be like there's so many types of boundaries and situations that we have to have today in order for our own mental health and our own mental well-being.
Yeah. About protecting our peace. I like to liken it to, say, for example, see yourself as a house with a lawn. And I don't know if you ever think about corner lots. Anybody ever live on a corner lot at all? If you think about it, everything happens on a corner lot. It does. People walk across your lawn. People don't curb their dogs. All sorts of things happen on it. People just come onto your property. So what do? You build a fence with a gate. And the gate is not to keep people out, it's to protect your area, to protect your land and your peace. Sometimes those fences actually turn into moats and brick walls, but we'll get there, right? But think about boundaries in that way. I always think about, you're not keeping people out, you're just figuring out who you're allowing in.
What that points out to me is that immediately it brings back to me when I worked for an engineering firm and we used to develop corner lots that you're talking about were like the prime lot to, and what you're describing is people establishing barriers or boundaries so that they get the sense of security that they need to be able to be active, productive member of that neighborhood or keep their own peace within themselves and their sanctuary. You're really doing something good. So I can reflect with that in a really actual way.
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting how you said that. Yes, it's like the prime real estate. Well, you don't have prime real estate to me all the time. We talk about how you talk about the gate and the fence and everything else in this corner lot. You're not always going to have access to me. And I think also when we think about, in our profession, Kevin, too, we talk about participants or clients and how I think they have an idea that they should have access to us. They want to know us. Is a fiduciary relationship where we have some of the power and we're doing a lot of talking, we're receiving a lot of information. We don't give a lot of information necessarily. We have to put that boundary into place because everything's finite. When you're in the room with me, you have my 100% attention. You have that access to me. But
You're right. And there's been so many times where I've had patients who have asked me to be their mentor, to be their a sponsor, to be their, depending on the agency and where I'm at, they've asked me to be their personal therapist. And so it is learning to set those boundaries, right? Even as a therapist, but yet, I think patients also, I think it's really teaching them the basics of boundaries. I know I spoke about this yesterday briefly, but I help people understand, when we get on the conversation about boundaries, there's three facets to having boundaries. And when those three facets is, I always ask them, uh, whose job is it to build the boundary? Whose job is it to break the boundary? Whose job is it to maintain the boundary? And I am surprised to actually see how many people think it's their job for all three, or think it's somebody else's job for all three, or what have you. And it's like, no, it's your job to build it, maintain it, and it's their job to break it. And so, and the reason I say that, I know when we're young and having fun, we get these fast cars, especially guys, right? So we get these fast cars, law.
Wait, wait, women like fast cars too.
Okay, okay, I love it then. And so the law says, not to speed, but yet, here we go getting speeding tickets, right? Because we enjoy the thrill, right? And the same thing with touching a hot stove when we're 2, 3 years old. Mother says, don't touch the hot stove, yet we touch it, right? And so, I mean, man, there's so many videos that I see on social media of people doing wheelies on motorcycles and four wheelers, and they're riding it down the interstates. And I'm like, even myself, right? I'm like, man, I'd love to get a motorcycle and do that. Law says you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to do that on the highway, but yet people are still doing it and they're having fun. And so, I think it's our natural rebellion to break boundaries, and it's learning to curb that. It is learning to definitely curb that. So yeah.
Yeah.
That's a dual side of it, because in order to set boundaries for yourself, you have to develop relationships with other people to establish your boundaries that you expect to be engaged in. Um, and there's so much with the trust issue that sometimes it can make things really complicated. I was thinking about a boundary that I should have known when I was 12 years old about riding my bicycle with no hands. So this funny looking tooth that I have is what happened was I even waved to the guy that was at the store. I was down the second hill and I looked up and I waved at him, and the next thing I know, I turned and looked, and then I didn't keep the boundaries of leaving my hands on the handlebars. Wow, right onto the pavement with my face. And I still, so some of the consequences of these boundaries that need to be either obeyed by yourself, or not necessarily obeyed, but applied to have the developed relationship with other people. It's really important to remember that there are certain things that you need to adhere to so that you're in a respectful way to either others or your own self. Otherwise, you can get injured. And that was a perfect example of it.
Yeah, it goes back to, I think, the thrill seeking that you were talking about, Kevin, as well. I think for our brains, evolutionary and the brain, everything else, we're hardwired for certain things. We're hardwired for influence as well, right? So we want to be able to, when we talk about the tribalistic ways that we think about things back at evolutionary times back then, is really about who was the most powerful, how are we going to eat tomorrow, kind of thing. And I have to assert my particular power over you in order to get us fed and watered and things like that. I think there's also the reward system you talked about, like, oh, the thrill is here. Oh my gosh, I'm getting something out of this. I'm going to push a little bit more. This is great. I mean, we talk about what we do to our bodies sometimes, people who, and that's a different kind of, I think, dopamine and everything else is going through it when you're jumping off of mountains or jumping off of something. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm pushing the boundaries of what human beings are supposed to do. So there's some thrill seeking. There's also some evolutionary things here that work into it as well.
No, no, you're and both of you are sharing exactly what research shows, as far as whether it be the dopamine system or the neurochemicals that run through our system, and to the physical boundaries, and even to the evolutionary pieces of human development, right? And at the same time, I think it's important to also remember that there are more than, there are more than just one or two boundaries, right? And we have emotional boundaries, we have boundaries with time, we have mental and intellectual boundaries, we have material boundaries, we have sexual boundaries also, and there's so many more types of boundaries, and this is just a little short list, right? But there's so many, and so boundaries transcend just the physical